Hi, my name is Mary Beth Kavner, and this is my oral presentation of my ethnographic research project for Dr. Carlson. The people group that I chose to research is the Chewa people of Malawi. Now, Malawi is called the warm heart of Africa, and that has indeed been my experience over 14 years of mission work in that country. The Chewa people are distinguished from other Malawians mainly by their language. They speak Chewa. Even though I was not able to visit Malawi during this project, I do have wonderful contacts there that I can trust for accurate information. Let me introduce you to Owen. Owen is an educated man of great integrity with whom I have worked for many years. He and his wife Esnat and his children are located in Lilongwe, Malawi, which is the capital city. Much of the information in this report comes directly from Owen. He taught church history at a seminary in Malawi in the past, and he currently serves as a registrar at a secular college. He has translated teaching material for me in the past, and I have found his opinion to be truth, and I trust what I receive from him. Let me also introduce Frank Maulana. He's a native of Malawi, but is currently working in the U.S. at Noble Research Institute, located right here in Ardmore, Oklahoma. Another resource that I want to mention is the 2018 Malawi Population and Housing Census Report. Malawi does a census every 10 years, and it was very interesting looking through all of the data. One thing I found sort of amusing was that the report includes stats on the number of households with different types of toilets. Did you know that only 3% of the households in Malawi have flushing toilets? Did you know that 6% of the houses in Malawi have no toilet at all? If you ever need a trivia question for a party, there you go. The Chewa people reside predominantly in Malawi, but also in Mozambique, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. They migrated to this area in the 15th century because of unrest and disease. Malawi is a landlocked country. It contains almost 46,000 square miles of some of the most beautiful and diverse scenery I have ever seen. It has Lake Malawi, which is just beautiful, the Nchisi rainforest, beautiful mountain ranges and lush tea farms, just to mention some of its stunning diversity. Malawi is a young country. They formed their own government in 1964, and I was actually there for their 50th celebration. They called it the Golden Jubilee, and they actually printed a special Bible just to commemorate that occasion. Let's take a look at some of the demographic information. The census report was the most useful for this demographics research, and the interesting thing is my internet searches didn't reveal this gold mine. Owen sent me the link to it, so it wasn't easily found on the web. The Chewa people are located mainly in central and southern Malawi, as well as some of the surrounding countries. As far as communities and subgroups, life is so different in the village versus in the city that I feel the need to identify these as subgroups. So we'll have urban and rural. So as I progress, you'll hear me distinguish between these groups whenever it's necessary. The city dweller will typically have a formal job, either working at a shop, working for a family, as a housekeeper, cook, or maintenance, or being a vendor along the road or in a market. Most children in the city will attend school, and homes in the city will typically have running water and electricity, an indoor kitchen, and rooms with doors. There are some really nice homes in Malawi, but these are not typically owned by the locals. These are the business owners. The village family will typically carry water from a well that could even be located up to a few miles from their home. They'll work in the garden, take care of animals, collect firewood, take care of the household. Children in the village will go to school if they learn easily and do a good job, and if the family doesn't need them to stay home and help with chores. If a family member does commute to work in a city, they are going to spend a significant amount of time riding a bicycle or on public transport. The current population of Malawi is just over 19 million, and it has a growth rate of about 3%. You can see by this age and sex breakdown that male and female are pretty much the same, but Malawi is a very young population, with almost half the population being younger than 14. The estimated life expectancy is 63 years, and 16% of the population is urban, 84% is rural. To help put Malawi's size and population density into perspective, it is about half the size of Oklahoma, but it has 10 times the population density of Oklahoma. In my experience, children just seem to fall out of the sky and appear from nowhere, and there is no such thing as privacy or personal space. Everything is crowded, and that's just the way it is. The migration rate to Malawi is 0, and I guess that makes sense because Malawi has such limited resources, and it is the 4th poorest country in the world. Marriage statistics don't show anything out of the ordinary except that data starts at age 12 as the base age of marital status, and also some in that country still practice polygamy, so that does complicate matters as well. One of the most interesting things about education is that a teacher will have 82 students in a class, and in the rural schools, the number could be closer to 100. Students have to pass exams to advance, and there are only a given number of attempts. Even though English is the official language of Malawi, it's really rarely heard outside the city. Chewa is the heart language of the Malawi people, and they are completely thrilled when an outsider takes the time to learn their language. There is no Rosetta Stone for learning Chewa, but I have requested it. A typical Chewa society recognizes the chief of the village as the leading authority. So rural families will bond together and they'll live in villages under the leadership of a village chief. There may also be an area chief, depending on the number of villages within a proximity. There are also chiefs in the urban areas. Family ties and respect are very important. There are social gatherings such as watching the Gule Wamkulu dances, attending funerals, weddings, and church, and all of these play a leading role in how the families relate to one another. And also during harvesting time, the families may work together to harvest each other's field. Women will socialize at the water well, maybe a pond or a creek, doing laundry, at the maize mill. So families depend on one another in times of need. When there's an event, different families come together to celebrate or to mourn. And in my observation, I have seen Malawians do a great job of helping one another, not so much out of a sense of duty, but because they understand how it feels to be the one who needs help. The way that you become adult in Malawi is you go through one of the initiation ceremonies. For boys, it's the Gule Wamkulu. For girls, it's the Chinamwali. And this can be done for girls even as young as 10. And once they're initiated, they're regarded as adults. Some girls even get married at the age of 12. On the national level, the president is honored with fireworks when they win the election. When they travel, the roads are cleared. Traffic is stopped for about 30 minutes prior to travel. Cars and bicycles are required to pull over to the side of the road and stop until the president's motorcade passes by. Being a chief is a lifetime commitment. The chief can select advisors. Chiefs have the right to discipline their subjects. They can order offenders to pay a fine, maybe chickens or money. They have the right to actually expel someone from the village for a serious crime such as theft. Malawians are very peace-loving, and foreigners are treated very well in their country. Malawians are very welcoming, and they're generous in spite of their poverty, and they focus on solving problems instead of complaining about the problem. They don't expect anything that they don't earn, and they're some of the most hardworking people I've ever met. One of the primary taboos is you must not enter a graveyard alone without permission. Adult children must never enter their parents' bedroom, and people must not wear hats at funerals or put their hands in their pockets when they're talking to elders. And then always shake and touch with your right hand, as the left is considered unclean. Some of the common traditions are that women wear wraps, which is called a chitenji. Their dresses always need to fall below their knees. The chitenji serves a ton of purposes, such as it protects the clothing from the dirt. You can use it to carry groceries, to carry laundry, to carry a baby, to keep warm. It just serves a multitude of purposes. Another tradition is that when you're preparing to eat, elders and honored guests will wash their hands first, and this consists of someone just pouring water and then you scrubbing your hands underneath it. So there's no soap. Before COVID, this was just water, but because soap's expensive. But during COVID, they've actually added some bleach to the water that they use to wash your hands. Traditional spiritual dances and songs in Malawi are a real treat, and they are just a nourishment to the soul. Even at a church service, you can get an entire workout during the song service. All songs have movement, and the movement has meaning. And one of the coolest things is that a group from the church can walk into a village, and the spiritual songs are already familiar to the villagers, even if they don't know Jesus. Singing is just used as a means of letting the people know that an event is getting started, and when people are nearby, they hear the singing, and they know that it's time to start. Other traditional dances that involve the Gule Wamkulu are not for worshiping God. Rather, they are for worshiping ancestors and spirits. This is a cult that sometimes appears at weddings and funerals. Dancers are always male, and they always wear masks. Malawians also make carvings and baskets, and they weave mats. These are all very common because they are everyday items that they need anyway. They'll also make pots and watering cans, but this is becoming rare because of the equipment that you need to make them. I actually have a 4-gallon watering can that I brought back from Malawi, and I use it all the time. Malawi is an oral culture, so their culture is very rich, but very little of it is written down. Schools will have very few books. Teachers will write information on the blackboard, and I use that term very loosely, and students will read and copy the information, and then there's a lot of discussion followed by questions from the teacher. Cell phones have become the primary means of communication, even in the villages. Smartphones are way more expensive in Malawi than they are in the States, and time is generally purchased in units and reloaded when necessary. Malawi also has a number of newspapers in print and online. They're sold by street vendors in the urban areas. I rarely see a newspaper in the villages. Electronic media is very prevalent in urban areas. Regarding education, Malawi has primary, secondary, and college and vocational schools. It's available to everyone, but there is a cost for uniforms, pencils, and paper, and as minimal as this may seem to us, many families cannot manage it for all of their children. Very few people will excel up through college and vocational school. Typically, by the time they finish secondary school, they need to go to work to contribute to or provide for their own family. College is very expensive in Malawi, and it's far beyond the reach of most. An ideal woman should wear something that covers her knees. The society does not respect women who do not dress modestly. Women in the urban areas are more prone to wear pants in a work environment, and casual attire in the urban areas is much like it is in the U.S. But women in the villages do not wear pants at all under any circumstances. Many in the villages don't wear shoes simply because they don't have them. Rural women also don't wear bras because they're inconvenient for breastfeeding and due to expense. And you'll notice in the children, they don't have underwear on. And again, it's due to the expense. There's no specific dress code for men, but because of the background from the British, their dress code is a little higher than what it is here in the States. A white-collar job is typically a suit, tie, pants, and also the same for pastors. The judiciary system and the Malawian army are superb. They have a significant presence at a lot of checkpoints in the country. However, the police have lost much of their credibility because of politics and corruption. I can't count the number of times that we've been stopped and I had to gift an item or two while we're going through a checkpoint to eliminate an extended delay. Medical care is in the hands of the government. 3 years ago, when I was in Malawi, I had to seek medical care due to an eye infection. I was issued a Malawi medical ID card, and I was seen by a doctor. He issued me a bottle of eye drops to take care of the problem. The visit was quick, it was free, and they didn't even charge for the medicine. 4 years ago, I visited a hospital when a friend of mine had a baby. The hospital was so crowded, maybe 8, 10, 12 patients in a room, no privacy, big, huge glass windows into the hallway, lots of family inside each room, gathered around a bed with nowhere to sit. The beds were more like cots, and there were many people sitting along the halls waiting to be admitted, and the line was just as long for those awaiting dismissal. Let's turn our attention now to the religious structure. About 87% of Malawi's population are considered Christian, but people of other faiths are free to practice their religion as well. Typically in the larger cities, you will see a mosque, a very big, obtrusive mosque, and they will do the call to prayers 3 times a day, very loud over the entire city. There are also those who still practice the traditional African religions, but overall, Malawians tend to be tolerant of other religions. Even with a high Christian population, there are many who continue to practice or believe in magic, usually in the form of witch doctors, and this is due to a lack of biblical knowledge. Think about it. When someone gets sick and doesn't have access to proper medical facilities, and they don't know about the power of prayer because they haven't been taught that, it just makes sense that they would go to the witch doctors for traditional treatment. I have to tell you, I saw this video on YouTube, and it shows an African witch doctor curing someone of their headache. It shows the healer, you can see, throwing ashes on the patient's head, chanting, and out of the blue, he slaps the bejesus out of him from behind so the patient didn't see it coming. So there still is some ancestor worship. People who believe in the ancestor spirits think that they need to offer sacrifices after their loved ones die so that their prayers will be answered. Some Christians also offer sacrifices as part of a prayer when there's a drought or some other big event. The Bible, of course, is their main document. It has been translated into their heart language of Chewa. Commentaries and study guides, however, are very rare. Very few are translated into Chewa, and even if they are available, very few people can afford to purchase them. Malawi Christians observe baptism, the New Year, Holy Communion, child dedication, and they try to attend annual conferences. Baptism in Malawi reminds me of what it might look like in Jesus' time. We walk a distance of several miles, singing and dancing along the way to the place of baptism, which could be a creek or a pond. The group may contain hundreds by the time that we arrive, and we have a short teaching with people sitting on the hillside. The singing resumes, and each candidate is baptized. It is a very special treat to be a part of that. The main religious celebrations are Easter and Christmas, and these are celebrated much like they are in the U.S., but they lack much of the secular emphasis. For example, Easter is a time of rededication and deep reflection, not a time of new dresses and Easter egg hunts. As a matter of fact, when I asked Owen if they hunt Easter eggs, he did not know what I was talking about. Let's turn our attention to the economic and political structure. Owen once worked for the Malawi Revenue Authority, and so the information that's in this section comes from a wealth of experience. As far as the economic structure goes, Malawi is a capitalist society, and the key player in the economy is agriculture. People depend on farming, and this is typically a hand-to-mouth economy. They produce and they consume. There's very few industries. All cars and machinery are imported. There's a huge public transport industry because there are many people who can't afford to own automobiles, but the quality of service does leave a lot to be desired. Many of these are very poorly serviced, and I have seen myself some horrible accidents. Even travel across Lake Malawi to the islands of Likoma and Chisumulu is possible, but it is extremely dangerous, and I've done this trip myself, and trust me, it is not pleasant. There is only one domestic airline, Malawi Airlines, and it operates in conjunction with Ethiopian. Of course, this pandemic has hurt this airline severely, just as it has hurt others in America. The tobacco industry is the largest employer, seconded by the tea industry. In Malawi, most everyone is born knowing how to farm with a hoe in their hand. A good portion of the population is also employed in fisheries and in the tourism sector. But as for formal employment, the government is the biggest employer. Most of these jobs are for teachers and health workers. And although the manufacturing industry is small, there is a textile manufacturer and some beverage companies. My personal favorite of these is Sobo Cherry Plum. It's a real treat that I enjoy when I go to Malawi. Private business does drive the economy, and businesses do pay large sums in taxes. And it depends on the item as far as how much. For example, luxury passenger vehicles with high engine capacities, or gas guzzlers as we call them, such as Mercedes-Benz and Hummers and Lincolns, they can be taxed over 100%. But more practical vehicles that help people in transporting goods, such as trucks, can bring a tax rate as low as 5%. The Malawi Revenue Authority plays the leading role of regulating what goods are imported and exported. They may use high tariffs, just like we do, to protect local industries such as sugar, tea, and tobacco. A large portion of the people live below the poverty level. The minimum wage, as set by the government, is 687 kwacha per day. Well, that is 92 cents per day. Malawi has experienced severe inflation in the last 10 years, and it is very difficult to live on less than $1 a day. Malawi doesn't have any Social Security or doesn't provide money to those who are not employed. It is completely up to an individual and their family members to support each other. In Malawi, there are three groups of political leaders. You have your president, the members of parliament, and ward councilors. Each of them are elected for a 5-year term by majority. There's no electoral college. And since Malawi became a country, it's only had 6 presidents. The first one, Hastings Banda, was in office for almost 28 years. The members of parliament make the laws, much like our Congress in the U.S. The ward councilors communicate these laws and work with the chiefs to implement them. I was there in May 2019 when elections were held, and this election was decided by a very narrow margin, and so protests were sparked across the country. It was widely believed that the elections were marked by fraud and that many of the votes were not even counted. Well, the Supreme Court intervened, and it ruled that indeed there was fraud. The elections were nullified, and fresh elections were held. It's kind of cool to me that when I saw these protesters, many of them were students, and I found out students were actually given time out of school and workers were given time off work to go out in the streets and protest these elections. You know, government corruption seems to be everywhere in the world, including the U.S. But in Malawi, due to the high levels of illiteracy, there are very few villagers that are aware of it. In most cases, corruption is brought to light through church leaders. Malawi has a very rich heritage. It is a uniting factor in the villages and a treat to see and hear. I only wish I could be invisible, sitting around a fire at night in a village, enjoying the storytelling and the singing. What a treat that would be. If we take a look at the literacy status, literacy is improving in Malawi. According to the 2018 census report, a person's considered literate if they're able to read or write a simple sentence in any language. And this kind of makes the stats look better than they are. The census shows that 31% of the population is illiterate, but in my experience, it is much higher rate than that. It's also interesting to me that the island of Lakoma has the highest literacy rate in the country. I have visited this area. There's actually 2 islands in that district, and they're actually near the Mozambique border. Owen says this high rate is due to missionaries who established a center at Lakoma in 1881, and they emphasized the importance of education. The population in that area was very small, so almost every village had someone who attended school, and this trend continues to date. When people see the value of the education, they want their children to have that advantage. The Chewa people have a very rich cultural heritage, and much of this has been mentioned already. This includes the famous Gule Wamkulu and Nganda dances for men and boys, the Chimtali dance for women, proverbs, folktales, and music. People learn proverbs as they grow up, listening to elders and mastering the meaning of these proverbs. Young people will gather around a fire in the evening to listen to folktales, and music is such an important part of the culture that's passed on. Children can learn songs at home, at church, at school, while doing chores. Singing is just a huge part of the African culture, and it's one that's really touched my heart. In storytelling, it's become another important aspect that adds to the attraction of the story, and it keeps the audience glued to the story. When we take a look at how evangelized Malawi is, information from the Joshua Project shows this percentage at 76%. So only about 11% of the population is unreached. By any missiological measurement, this country is reached. One factor that needs to be considered, though, is that in remote villages, people need to be physically nearby a church, given that few people own motor vehicles. To Americans, it's nothing to drive a few miles or even 20, 30, 40 miles to church. But this is too much for the villagers, and they are not likely to undertake such a walk. As far as the history of work in the area goes, the Presbyterians were the first group to work among the Chewa people. The efforts didn't really emphasize the concept of salvation as an instant conversion to Christ. There were actually a series of steps that you had to go through, and you became a Christian by passing through a number of these steps. As far as ongoing church planting efforts, in the 20th century, the Baptists, the Assemblies of God, and several others came on the scene. Through the missionary work of the IMB, the Baptist Convention of Malawi was born. The Baptist Church is doing great work in evangelism among the local people, and it is actually one of the top 5 biggest Protestant churches in Malawi. It's important to note as well that there are groups that work apart from denominations, led by individuals to do ministry with the sole purpose of winning souls to Christ without a connection to the local church. One of the things I'm most excited about are all of the ministry resources that are available. One of the things that Presbyterians did right was translation of the Bible into local Malawi languages, including Chewa. These Bibles, you'll find them in shops, and for most Malawians, the challenge is just the cost. They cost around $10 a piece, and this is just not manageable for most of them. Other printed materials include Sunday school books and songbooks. During my visit in 2014, I spoke with the CEO of the Malawi Bible Society about making the Chewa version available on the YouVersion Bible app. I also emailed the developers at the YouVersion Bible app regarding the same issue. That vision was realized shortly after that visit, and this has made a tremendous impact in my life, and it was the primary means of my learning the Chewa language. In the app, you can split screen, so you've got the two Bibles side by side, and you can see the Chewa version of a scripture and the English version of a scripture. So you can learn words. You can even listen to the Chewa version to make sure that you're saying things right. This is a game changer. So when people ask me, how did you learn Chewa? Well, I tell them that God taught me through His Word. There's a couple of other audio resources that really need to be mentioned. One is the free audio Bible MP3 from faithcomesbyhearing.com. These files can be downloaded and put on a CD or on a thumb drive. You know, lots of cars in Malawi have USB ports, and so they can play the Bible as they drive. In addition to that, the Chewa Talking Bible that runs on solar or batteries, it's just a self-contained unit, and it doesn't need any other devices. The cost is about $50, which is pretty high, and they're a little less expensive when you purchase them in country. You know, so much of Malawi is oral in their learning style, so these options are great for those who don't read well or at all. Another resource that I've used extensively is the Jesus film videos. In addition to the basic Jesus video, there are about 10 other videos in Chewa. These include the Jesus video for children and the story of Magdalena. Although these are white actors with the Chewa voiceover, I'm most impressed with the series called Walking with Jesus, and it's a mini-series filmed with local actors in the local language in a culturally appropriate setting. The most exciting thing about this mini-series is it doesn't shy away from cultural issues like polygamy. It meets them head on with biblical teaching. What a great tool for discipleship. One of the barriers to evangelism is the trademark cultural belief about the Gule Wamkulu secret cult. Beginning with the first missionaries even, this cult would disrupt their church gatherings. They even went to the extent of making the Gule Wamkulu look like a white woman and named it Maria after the mother of Jesus and Simon after Simon Peter. This cult is still very strong today because to be a real man among the Chewa, you have to be initiated into this cult. It's done in a graveyard, and their actions and beliefs are contrary to the gospel. And this cult is feared even among believers. I have been in one of my churches before where the cult would come through and they would say, "You will not worship today because the Gule Wamkulu is in your village." And what happens? The church does not worship. They exert a lot of power over the rural population. Poverty is also a major challenge in more than one way. Sometimes families just don't have decent clothing that covers their private parts, and they would not dare come to church in such a state. Another way that poverty presents a challenge is in the guardianship of supplies and materials for a local church. Someone has to keep the songbooks, the Bibles, the Lord's Supper supplies, the offering plates, the children's books. But the monetary value of these materials is enough to feed a starving family. So many times they're stolen and sold. This applies even to Bibles. People see that if they do what the missionaries want, they'll receive a Bible. After the missionaries leave, they sell the Bible to help feed their family. Many who receive Bibles can't even read. There's certainly a temptation for corruption in the church, just as there is in the government. Literacy is also a barrier in more ways than one. It's an issue especially in the rural villages because converts must feed on the Word, but so few can read, especially in the older population. Another way that literacy is an issue is in training pastors. It's possible that a pastor prepares to preach every Sunday morning without a Bible or the ability to read and understand it. One of the theological barriers is that the dominant theology is that which was advocated by the Presbyterians. This includes infant baptism, and the concept of salvation or being born again really has not been emphasized. Another theological barrier is that conversion is not really understood as once and for all. The same people who pray to receive Jesus today will do it again tomorrow. No matter how hard we try to drive that point home, you can see that it's new to them. Another issue is the importance of baptism. We may have 1,000 people accept Christ, but only 20 of them come for baptism. We can speculate a lot of reasons. Malawians are not accustomed to getting their head underwater. It's really unpleasant for them. We come during the cold season and the water is really cold for them. They may not be able to travel several miles to come to baptism. We're not really sure why they don't show, but they just don't. How are we going to deal with these barriers? Well, issues of theology have to be dealt with through sound biblical teaching. Malawians do have an appetite for the gospel, but many times they're taught wrong theology. Without the wisdom and knowledge of God's word to test the message is just accepted as fact. Well, the Bible is the heartbeat of a Christian life. If only they would feed on the word, it would become difficult to keep more people from receiving that gospel. I don't see any other way to overcome the scarcity of materials other than the missionaries supplying them. This includes training, children's materials, Sunday school, songbooks, Lord's Supper supplies, and especially Bibles. The Baptist Publication Office is more than willing to quickly duplicate materials, and they look good and they don't cost that much. I brought materials in the past on a flash drive, and they've produced study materials that I can give to the churches. These efforts in the past have been focused on short-term conference materials, but perhaps I should focus more on handy, easy-to-follow Sunday school materials. Well, this also requires identifying some key leaders who are committed to teach the gospel truth to the churches. They've got to be equipped, they've got to be supported. There are so many songs about God, nature, the difficulties of life. Songs are just universal in Malawi, and people love learning new ones. Perhaps these could be used to teach sound theology. Songwriters could select a few topics, such as once saved, always saved, or the importance of the word, or baptism, and develop songs and movements. I think this method could be very effective to reach the lost and teach them what it means to be a follower of Christ. We could also use drama, proverbs, storytelling. So many of these things could be very effective to correct theology issues. Issues of culture should be dealt with by education. Local people should be encouraged to go to school to improve their understanding of a correct worldview of nature and God. Now, as far as poverty goes, man, I wish I knew the answer. The fact is, there's enough food in the world to feed everyone in the world. The problem is getting it to them. This makes this issue even more heartbreaking. It seems that no matter how much we give, it's just not enough. It's simply a drop in the bucket. The Malawi government seems unable to root out the corruption so that what's given actually reaches those in need. As Christians, we must just do what we're told to do. We must give to the poor and never close our eyes to those needs. We must not judge or draw conclusions about those in poverty. Jesus said the poor would always be among us. We must be obedient to do what he tells us to do. One of the first steps in church planting should be door-to-door, village-to-village outreach. Whether this is done by missionaries or by believers looking to plant a new church, we need to speak as if they may never hear anything more than what they hear in that moment. We need to spend time and dwell with them. I would rather place importance on telling the story of Jesus well and increasing the chance of receiving true converts rather than go quickly and shoot for large numbers of converts. This is a time to utilize storytelling, songs, proverbs to help them learn and remember. During that time, we can invite everyone for a time of daily afternoon teaching in a central location. We can teach them the basics of Christianity, such as salvation, prayer, who Jesus is, who the Holy Spirit is, the eternal nature of salvation, and so much more. We can announce a day and location for baptism and keep on discipling them and invite them to Sunday service as well. As far as the type of church, I think something simple with just local leadership. The focus should not be on the number of people or a future building or location, but rather on doctrine. They can meet under a tree. They can meet around a fire. A schoolroom or a community building will suffice until a need arises for a building. Too many want to launch into a building campaign, but the focus needs to be on discipleship. We can identify 1 or 2 key local leaders who are committed to the gospel. This is really difficult and requires guidance from an established, trusted local leader, because anyone can present themselves well and impress a missionary for a week or so. That doesn't mean they're qualified to lead a church. The local people know who they can trust. You know, soccer is a huge thing in Malawi, and it's a great way to reach out. You could have an activity and then invite those people to come to teaching. As the church grows, more and more key leaders would need to be identified. Once more people have accepted Christ and they're growing, then they need to start looking for a place to meet regularly. Again, the starting place can be a classroom. They can learn stewardship and learn to save money year after year. They can actually start molding bricks and start building a house for God. The church needs to be self-supporting, self-governing, and self-propagating. Some of the specific prayer needs. One of the struggles is entanglement with the anti-Christian cultural practices. Even some Christians find it hard to separate themselves from their cultural beliefs, and this is a big stumbling block. Prayers needed to avoid syncretism. They need to pray against the spirit of fear. Pray for the indwelling of the Holy Spirit, and that the people will find a firm foundation in the Word. Pray for unity in the church, and that God's blessings would just pour out on them. Pray for wisdom and integrity among the leaders. They should not run churches like village kings. They should envision themselves as servants. What can the local churches do? Short-term mission teams should provide sound teaching and Bible-based doctrines to the churches. Provide Sunday school materials for adults and children that disciples them. Mission teams should teach the church the importance of evangelism. You can focus on several different methods of doing so and spend time practicing, and then actually go out and have people share their testimony. Let the church lead out in door-to-door witnessing after training. This gives them accountability in their community as well. Discipleship needs to take center stage. Missionaries can bring resources to disciple churches. It must be understood that we make disciples to make disciples. No teaching is to end in the person that's trained. It's to flow into another one. Everyone needs a Timothy and a Paul, someone they pour into and someone that pours into them. Medical missionaries are also needed. It's so important that the people appreciate the holistic approach of the gospel, spiritual and physical. Related to education, education specialists should form part of the teams and set up schools within the churches. This is the reason why certain districts have high literacy levels, because of the impact of education introduced by the missionaries. At the very least, missionaries need to emphasize the importance of education. We need to also support the construction of new buildings. Local people can definitely mold bricks. That is one of their specialties. However, support should be given in terms of providing cement and roofing materials. It's very important to construct a building that will stand the test of time, and many of our rural Baptist churches are so poorly constructed and they collapse within a year. I hope that you've enjoyed listening to this information about Malawi, Africa, as much as I have enjoyed sharing it with you. And I hope that you get a sense of what a wonderful, hard-working, caring, loving people that they are. There is work to be done in Malawi, regardless of the high number of Christians that are already there. They need training, they need leadership development, and that is my focus in the area. Thanks for listening.